Good evening and welcome to Skull at 7. My name is Patryk Witkowski and I am joined today by two former SNP MSPs, Linda Fabiani and Sandra White. Hello to both of you.
Hi.
Hi, good afternoon. Oh, no, sorry, good evening.
Good evening to you as well. For our first story, we've got the Ukraine update, day 796 of a conflict. Ukraine's troops have made a tactical retreat westwards from the villages of Berdichi, Semenivka, and Novomykhailivka on the war's eastern front, according to Colonel General Alexander Syrsky, Ukraine's military commander-in-chief. The enemy has engaged up to 4 brigades in these directions, is trying to develop an offensive west of Avdiivka and Marinka, making its way to Pokrovsk and Kurakov, Syrsky said, adding the retreat's purpose was preserving the lives and health of our defenders. Russia has consolidated recent battlefield gains and is attempting to break through Ukrainian defensive lines before new US military assistance arrives. Ukraine security officials describe the situation on the battlefront in Donbass region as very difficult and not critical or catastrophic. Despite the developments, US-based think tank, the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, has said Russia remains unlikely in the short term to make operationally significant gains west of Avdiivka. Ukrainian forces had so far reportedly been outnumbered 3-1, but the limited resources had still prevented Russian forces from making the kinds of advances the greater combat power should allow. Refreshed Ukrainian units being sent, combined with additional weaponry, would force the Russian command to either accept that a near-term wider or deeper penetration is unlikely, or commit additional reserves to the area, the ISW said. There were unconfirmed reports that the Ukrainian military struck a Russian air defense unit at Kap Tarkankut on the western coast of occupied Crimea. Long-range ATACMS missiles supplied by the US this month were used. Explosions were reported in the northern Crimean town of Dzankoy after the previous attacks there on an airfield and Russian missile launcher system. Early on Sunday, Russian drones hit a hotel in the southern port city of Mykolaiv, according to Vitaly Kim, the region's governor. He said that a heat-generating plant was also damaged. On Sunday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said, "We are still waiting for the supplies Ukraine has promised." Ukraine was promised. We are still waiting for the supplies that Ukraine was promised, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said, continuing to say, "We are expecting these volumes and scope that can change the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine's interest." After speaking with the U.S. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries about American aid approved last week, Zelensky said, "In my conversation with Mr. Jeffries, I underscored that Patriot systems are needed, and as soon as possible." Speaking about entry to the European Union, President Zelensky said Ukraine had met all conditions for accession talks to start. Now the EU must meet its obligation. On entry, he said, quote, "On entry to the NATO military alliance, which the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has said Ukraine will join eventually." Zelensky said that every country that shares common values and is ready to defend them deserves an invitation to the alliance. Now, Linda Fabiani, what do you make of the ongoing Ukraine situation?
Oh, I think it's just despair, for those of us who believe in democracy and are absolutely appalled at Putin's expansionism. Every time we hear of a Russian advance, however limited, it makes your heart sink. I think it's really interesting that Mr. Zelensky, President Zelensky, is now saying that they have met the conditions for EU accession talks. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. and where we get to with that, because there were promises made. But of course, there's a lot of diplomacy has to be going on around all of that stuff.
And Sandra, would you want to see Ukraine as part of the European Union?
If that's what the Ukrainian people want, yes, of course, I would like to see that happening. But I do have thoughts in regards to just how genuine America, the USA, is in protecting the Ukraine. I don't have a lot of faith in what's happening with the USA at the moment, particularly when they're actually, obviously, the genocide that's happening in Gaza, and they're behind, providing Israel with weapons and the cost of that as well. I don't see how they can possibly do this in two fronts, in Ukraine and also in Israel, and you obviously get Lebanon and Syria and other countries involved in this too. So I have real worries that the people of Ukraine are being led down a path and there's no ending to it. And that's where I'm really worried, the fact that so many people have been killed, so many promises, as Linda has already alluded to, have been made in regards to joining the EU. None of them have been fulfilled yet, and that is a big worry to me. I think there's a lot of questions to be asked about the NATO situation, and particularly the USA's involvement in Ukraine, Russia, and obviously the conflict at the moment in Israel and Gaza.
Thank you both. And moving on to our next story, we've got the latest from Israel and Gaza. At least 34,488 Palestinians have been killed and 77,643 injured in Gaza since the 7th of October, according to a statement from Gaza's health ministry today. Reporting for Al Jazeera from Rafah, Tarek Abu Azum has said that it has been an extremely difficult night for civilians and that at least 20 Palestinians were killed, including 5 children, by Israeli airstrikes. Antony Blinken has told a meeting of regional leaders in Riyadh that the most effective way to alleviate humanitarian suffering in Gaza is to secure a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Speaking in Saudi Arabia, the U.S. Secretary of State said that there had been measurable progress in delivering aid to Gaza, which Israel has besieged for 6 months, but more is needed. Blinken said he respected and understood the profound emotions people were feeling about the human suffering in Gaza, but also expressed frustration that the role of Hamas was seemingly being erased in protests at U.S. campuses and beyond. Tehran criticized the U.S. for the arrests of about 275 protesters in the U.S. over the weekend. UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron has said the current proposal put to Hamas includes a sustained 40-day ceasefire and the release of thousands of Palestinian prisoners. Cameron added that he believed the Hamas leadership and those who took part in the 7th October attack inside Israel need to leave Gaza before a two-state political solution is feasible. The ex-prime minister said the conflict will not end until all the hostages abducted on the 7th of October are released. Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry said today that his country was hopeful about a proposal for a truce and hostage release in the Gaza Strip. France's Foreign Minister Stéphanie Séjourné, visiting the region, said, "Things are moving forward, but you always have to be careful in these discussions and negotiations. The situation in Gaza is catastrophic, and we need a ceasefire." Israeli media is reporting that Israel has lowered to 33 the number of hostages expected to be released by Hamas in return for a ceasefire, and the release of Palestinian detainees held by Israel. Several European member states are expected to recognize Palestinian statehood by the end of May, the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, said. 140 of 193 UN member states have recognized the state of Palestine. On 18th April, the US vetoed a draft Security Council resolution that would have recognized Palestine as a full member of the UN. Sorry. Palestinian news agency Wafa reports that Israeli security forces detained 12 Palestinians overnight in the occupied West Bank. It said raids were carried out in Hebron, Tulkarm, Jenin, and Jericho. The United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Agency, UKMTO, has reported an incident near Yemen's port city of Mocha, which is suspected to be another attack on shipping by Yemen's Houthis. Hamas al-Qassam brigades said today it had targeted an Israeli military position with a salvo of missiles from South Lebanon. Israel's military has claimed that overnight it once again struck at Hezbollah targets inside Lebanon. Sandra, starting off with you, what are your thoughts on Israel as it stands right now and the Israel-Gaza conflict?
I feel very, very emotional. I've been to Gaza. I've been to the refugee camps, Shatila, been to the hospital there as well. I know the land there quite well, but not as it is just now, unfortunately. I think the truth has to be told. This is a genocide. They have committed unbelievable acts of cruelty, as the Israeli government. It is a genocide, has been proven. Basically, the international courts have said it also. And yet, nothing has been done. It's continued constantly. 35,000 people killed. Graves have been dug up of people basically executed, young children, medics executed and buried, some of them buried alive. If that's not a war crime, I'd like to ask, what is? I mean, you look at the situation with the UN, America, etc., being able to veto these types of things. Something has to be done. Out of all of these tragic events, something has to be done to ensure that one or two nations cannot vote against others to stop this genocide. What's happening just now, and I mentioned before in Ukraine as well, in regards to the monies that's been supposedly put in, constantly putting money in, America anyway, and Britain, sending arms there. No wonder so many people are taken to the streets. And I absolutely applaud them throughout America, particularly in the campuses there, the cruelty, the violence that the American police have perpetrated against these decent young people. And without these decent young people, we will not get anywhere. This has got to stop. The world cannot watch babies dying in incubators, people being buried alive. It's an absolute disgrace. And I'll say it time and time again. How we stop it, Hamas had already said that if they released their prisoners, they would release the hostages. Well after October the 7th, they'd said this. Israel blocked that. Just recently, 10 days ago, I think it was, Hamas gave over another appeal. We will do X, Y, and Z if we go back to the 1967 agreement. Israel blocked that as well. Why is it the world, apart from a few states, as you mentioned already, recognising the state of Palestine, why are they doing nothing to stop this genocide? You looked at Srebrenica, which was an absolute horrific situation in the old Yugoslavia as well. But they sent peacekeeping troops in. Why are they not sending peacekeeping troops into Gaza, into Palestine? Jings, you can't even get a journalist in there, or they're killed. The most journalists in any war have been murdered by Israeli snipers. That tells you something. This can't continue. And I'm happy and pleased that these people, myself and others included, are out there demonstrating against the genocide perpetrated by the Zionists in Israel. And the world has to step up and take a side, and take the side of the decent, righteous people, not the side of the terrorists, which in my opinion is the Zionists.
Thank you, Sandra. Linda, what would you like to be done about the Israel-Gaza conflict?
Well, the very basic thing for me is to stop the arms, stop supplying them with arms. That's what I would add to what Sandra said. And there's a real anomaly there. On one side we hear, oh, aid is being delivered, we're doing rather well in delivering aid. Well, you can deliver as much aid as you like when you're still selling arms to a state with a government that is intent on wiping out Palestine. You can put in as much aid as you like and it doesn't actually matter. So for me, it's about arms sales, it's about recognition of the state of Palestine. And we should also, and on one hand, Egypt's saying that they are, a wee bit hopeful about the latest thing on the table, and it's about release of, and this always strikes me as weird, release of hostages by Hamas, and yes, they are hostages, that's not in doubt. And then it talks about in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. But there's so many Palestinians held in Israeli jails, detained without due process. In my mind, they're pretty much hostages as well. Um, and there is just such weasel words spoken, and the rhetoric is very different when used about Palestine as to when it's used about the Zionists, as Sandra said. And meanwhile, while all this is going on, there are still land grabs and incursions into the West Bank that barely get reported, and the extent of them, and all that's been going on for years and years as well. So it's just the most horrendous situation in the world, the international community. Those with power in the international community appear to put different standards when it comes to the state of Israel than they do on everyone else. And the hypocrisy in there is absolutely rampant. David Cameron spoke fine words today, and again put all the emphasis on Hamas having to accept. While actually you've got an Israeli government, a Zionist government, which for decades now have not accepted any reasonable solution for two states and for a decency of life for Palestinians. So stop the arms sales first. Tell Israel that enough is enough and that they will not be supported any further in what they're doing.
Thank you to you both. Moving to our biggest story for today, and our main story. Hamza Yusuf resigns as First Minister and SNP leader. First Minister Hamza Yusuf has announced that he will. Hamza Yusuf resigns as First Minister and SNP leader. Right. First Minister Hamza Yusuf has announced that he will stand down. Speaking at a news conference at the First Minister's official residence in Bute House, Edinburgh, Mr. Yusuf said. Mr. Yusuf said the following: After spending the weekend reflecting on what is best for the government and country I lead, I have concluded that repairing our relationships across the political divide can only be done with someone else at the helm. I intend to stand down as party leader. I will continue as First Minister until my successor has been elected, particularly as the Parliament will be debating some incredibly important legislation in the coming days and weeks. I cannot tell you what an honor it has been to be the First Minister of a country I love, the country I am raising my family in, and the only country I will ever call home. I have had the honor of serving in government for almost 12 years in a variety of roles. Although I am sad that my time as First Minister is ending, I am so grateful and blessed for having the opportunity so few are afforded to lead my country, and who could ask for a better country to lead than Scotland? Linda, asking you first, how will Scotland judge and reflect Humza Yousaf's time in office?
Well, I think Hamza Yusuf had a really difficult job to do. There was an awful lot of what he took over, which of course was not of his making, that was always going to be very, very difficult. Um, How will he be judged as time goes by? I think he'll be judged as a fairly decent person, a good guy, who tried his best and was not successful for all sorts of reasons. I think there have been times where his judgment has been a bit awry in certain things. I think that's been largely because he is someone who would always want to do the best for everyone involved and reach a solution. Sometimes leaders have to be quite ruthless. I'm not sure that Hamza really has that level of ruthlessness within him, bless him. So I think he would be judged further down the line as somebody who did their best. And it was doing their best in very, very hard times, and it didn't work.
And Sandra, same question for you. How will the Scottish public reflect on Hamza Yusuf and his time in office and his time as First Minister?
I think Hamza basically summed up everything in his resignation speech today. It was statesmanlike, it was empathetic, dignified. I thought it was very emotional as well. And no matter how you criticise or whatever, there's feelings on every side at times. Everyone's got feelings. But when he made that statement today, I think he summed himself up as a very decent person who done his best. He inherited a number of problems. It was not his fault. He inherited them. He tried his best to resolve them. The situation with the Green Party, I mean, what would you do? The Green Party's membership had called for an emergency meeting, and in that emergency meeting they were wanting some certain things, and if Patrick Harvie and Lorna Slater hadn't given them that, then they were going to basically say, well, that's it, you have to resign, to Lorna Slater and Patrick Harvie. So faced with that, and that was going to take 4 weeks, I understand, faced with that, you had two choices. Did you wait until the Green Party had their say and came back and told you what they were going to do? Or did you react and say, well, sorry, sorry pal, the show's over, basically. I think he made the right decision then. He showed a bit of leadership and gumption at that particular point. Maybe, as Hamza himself said, he could have handled it a wee bit better. But hey ho, that's the way politics work. Linda already said some people are ruthless and some people are not ruthless enough. But he had to make a decision. I think he made the right decision by going first. I've got lots of friends in the Green Party, and Linda knows lots of people too. We've worked with them when we were electing members. I didn't think, quite honestly, they would be so petty to not necessarily the policies of the SNP, but basically just saying they cannot work with Hamza Yusuf, work with other people, of course, that's what they said, another leader, but they couldn't work with him. That's not politics, that's school playground stuff, basically very petty indeed as far as I'm concerned. And when I come to the other situation with Ash Denham, of course, she was elected as an SNP MSP and then went to Alba for her reason, good or bad. She went to Alba, wasn't elected as Alba, and then all of a sudden thought she was going to be the kingpin, or not necessarily perhaps Ash Denham, but somebody else pulling the strings at the back. I don't need to name that person. I think everybody knows who it is. You couldn't work with that. And then you had the situation where really what it boiled down to, you saw the comments today from Douglas Ross, Anas Sarwar, etc. In fact, the nicest comment I saw on Twitter was from Jack McConnell, who said, good luck to Hamza, wish him well, etc. That didn't come from the other unionist parties, basically, or the other unionists. So Hamza was faced with, and this is what all along the Tories were going to do, they wished to destroy the Scottish Parliament. That's the aim. And even now, Douglas Ross has said, we got rid of Nicola Sturgeon, we got rid of Hamza Yusuf, we will get rid of the Scottish Government. That's what they're there for. And as soon as the Scottish people recognise that, and I think they have, because lots of people have spoke to me today, and the resolve to support the SNP has been greater, in my opinion, from folk I've spoken to, than it ever was. So to me, it was grandstanding on all of their parts, particularly the Green Party, and really it will revert back to them. And I don't think it will do them any good at all. Hamza did a lot of good things. He worked very, very hard. Himself and Nadia and his family sacrificed a lot. And all I can say is good luck to them and all the best for the future. He'll still be there in the Parliament. He said he'll be in the back benches. But yeah, decent guy, as far as I'm concerned, and a lot of other people too. Decent, principled person, brought down by the Unionists, and in some cases, really a rabid media. That's all I can say. We're against independence, and good luck to whoever takes over that position.
Thank you,
Because
Sandra.
Scottish politics at the moment, I think Linda will probably agree with me, is absolutely toxic.
Right. Taking an element of what Sandra was just mentioning there, Linda, could you expand on some of these political divides mentioned in Hamza Yusuf's speech, and also why he couldn't be the person to mend them?
Gosh. Well, I think I'll pick up on some of the things Sandra said, and I think she's absolutely right. I mean, I think it's become apparent over the last 3 years that the Tory group, led by Douglas Ross, is intent on bringing down the Parliament. They don't believe in devolution. I think that's very plain. Westminster is absolutely kingpin for them and should make all the decisions for Scotland. So that's a major decision. A major division that's there right from the start. The SNP believes that we should have a strong Scottish Parliament with as many powers as possible, and that we should have an independent Parliament. So it's a never the twain shall meet. I mean, Douglas Ross said today, when there was a discussion about a potential leader, that he wouldn't work with any First Minister that believed in independence. I mean, what's happened to free thought? We're not allowed to have free thought. You know, at least half the folk in this country believe in independence. Who are they to say otherwise? And then you've got the Greens. You know, Sandra said, you know, childish politics. Absolutely. The Greens have to decide what they are. Are they a bona fide political party, or are they a pressure group? Because they've been acting like a pressure group, and the pettiness of it. But add into that mix, you know, everyone's always said, you know, we have two independence believing parties in the Scottish Parliament, you know, the SNP and you had the Greens. And I've said that myself many, many times. And then you get their co-leader Lorna Slater saying that independence isn't a red line for the Green Party. Seriously? That's a real worry. So there's another division. And then you've got, I'm discounting the Lib Dems because they just jump in every bandwagon and say what they think is popular at the time. But then you've got so-called Scottish Labour. And I mean, I listened to online, I didn't hear it live, Keir Starmer, their leader, getting interviewed and talking about democracy and the right of people to make decisions. And he was talking about Brexit, etc., etc. And when challenged on the right of folks to make decisions, talking about Scotland having another independence referendum, he was all over the place, and he was basically saying, no, I'm not allowing that. So Scottish Labour have bought into that, and I'm stunned at that. I'm not stunned at Anas Sarwar because I think he's just riddled with ambition. That's what that's about. But there must be people like Monica Lennon and others sitting in the Labour benches who cringe at that kind of stuff, that denial of democracy. So there's a divide as well. So you've got all these divisions amongst and between parties, but you then have divisions within parties as well. And my own party, the SNP, is not immune to that either, and that's perhaps something we'll start to discuss later on in this article. So the divisions are there. It's pretty toxic. But it's the doing down of the Parliament by the Tories that has been depressing me over the last few years. They will do anything to do down the Scottish Parliament, devolution. And that is both the Scots Tories and the mob that are sitting at Westminster at the moment.
Thank you. And so, Sandra, explain to us, what is the process going to look like now? What happens now after the announcement of a resignation? And who do you see as the potential candidates, and who will become the next SNP leader?
Well, Hamza has already said he's obviously stepped down, but he will stay in place until a leader has been appointed. He's asked the NEC to set up an election process. So that's the way it would work for that, basically. Now, there's been a number of names thrown into the ring. Jenny Gilruth's name is thrown into the ring, but she has said she is completely supporting Hamza. Kate Forbes' name has been thrown into the ring as well. And Neil Gray's name has been thrown into the ring. And Stephen Flynn, and that's not impossible because Alex Salmond did that when he was in Westminster. He was a leader in the Scottish Parliament as well. And the name, and Linda's already mentioned that, is John Swinney. And you know, the funny thing that I saw online before this started was that Patrick Harvey said he couldn't work with John Swinney. Now, John Swinney has been put forward, and we've had lots of people put their names forward, lots of MSPs and others who have said, put their name forward to support John Swinney as a safe pair of hands. And there's no doubt he is a safe pair of hands. But I don't know, I love John to bits, I think everyone does. He is a safe pair of hands. And it's quite sad that it's going to fall on him, which I think probably will happen, that he will be the next First Minister. So that's the way the process will go. Once the competition, everyone puts a name forward, whoever is elected, they will become the First Minister. Now, a wee scenario could be, Keith Brown, basically, he could put his name forward. I think Keith's quite capable, but he's never said so. But what would happen if Hamza's name was put forward as Deputy First Minister? I'll just throw that into the equation just to see what happens. But at the moment, I think if you're a betting person, the bookies would probably give you whatever, good odds that it'd be John Swinney. But then you've got to look at the other situation where, are the Tories still going to push for a no confidence vote in the Scottish Government? That's another scenario that could come into it. Even though the situation with the First Minister is sorted, are they going to still push for that? They'll never win that vote anyway, basically. But I was pretty surprised at Patrick Harvey. What's the reason for him not wanting John Swinney to be there? I find that quite strange, actually. And I'll pass it on to Lyndon. Maybe she'll give me a wee bit more insight. I don't know.
Yeah, I suppose, Linda, so same overall question of how do you feel about potential candidates, but also feel free to respond to anything that Sandra just listed as well.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we have to do, and that I'm finding media generally confused about, is we have to divide the position of party leader from that of First Minister. The First Minister of the Scottish Government, and you've got the leader of the party. They are two separate things. So there's two processes. There's a process of the Parliament having to elect a First Minister, and there's a process of our party, the Scottish National Party, electing a leader. Now, the standing orders and the party's constitution says that the leader of the party, if they're an MSP, should be the leader of the parliamentary group, therefore First Minister. But they are two separate elections. John Swinney's name has been pushed, and I totally get that. I mean, John is such an impressive politician, such a capable person. I can understand why everyone in the party, and I would think a general agreement in Parliament that John Swinney would be the best person to be First Minister. But of course, John Swinney doesn't do anything likely. He hasn't said whether he will consider this or not. He hasn't said whether he's going to put his name forward. He's obviously considering it. And John will take time to consider what is best. And he'll be talking with his family, and that's as it should be. But John Swinney, when he makes his decision, it will be a decision based on what he believes is best for the Parliament, the party, and most important of all, the country. Because this is something that those who seem intent on bringing the government down are forgetting about. There's a country full of people who are having a really hard time at the moment because of the Tory government at Westminster. They need stability. They need to know what's going on. There's so many terrible things happening, not least the cost of living. People need stability. So that's the kind of thing that John Swinney will be thinking about. That stability. I would love to see it happen because I think John is very capable of bringing the Parliament together and giving us that kind of stability. So I think we just have to watch the space and see what happens here. Other contenders, obviously Kate Forbes is a contender. She ran Humza close last time. And this is something that's been bothering me, and Sandra will see exactly what I'm saying here. I saw a wee report just before I came on that if Kate Forbes got elected as leader of the party and then put forward as First Minister, the Greens have already said they wouldn't support her. I've heard that some members of the SNP group have been saying that they wouldn't vote for her as First Minister. Well, let me tell you something right now. If the party democratically elects anyone as the leader, it is incumbent upon the SNP ticket elected people in the Scottish Parliament to back that leader that's democratically elected by the party. So I want everyone to have cool heads here and be thinking about Scotland, be thinking about the road to independence, and be thinking about the electorate and to stop thinking about themselves. There we go.
Thank you. That was very interesting. You mentioned the concept of stability, wanting to see stability in the leader. During the SNP leadership candidate race, there was this concept of Humza Yousaf being the continuity candidate, of him having this continuity from Nicola Sturgeon and somebody like Kate Forbes of Ash Regan kind of representing a change, a shift for the party. Do you think that people will... Do you agree with that concept of Humza Yousaf being the continuity candidate? Who do you see as the continuity now? And will people want to see that going? Or will this opposing rhetoric emerge saying, oh, continuity didn't work, we do need a significant change? And that's a question for either of you. Either of you can take this, really.
Well, I'm happy to jump in on that, if you don't mind, Sandra. I think Humza Yousaf was he put himself forward as a continuity candidate. And I did vote for Humza in the leadership election, perfectly upfront about that. I never had an issue with Humza Yousaf because, he was doing his very best and I rate him. However, I think perhaps he was too tied to continuity. I think there were some changes that perhaps he should have made, whether it be about those who were giving him advice, for example, whether it be about whether it was about thinking about whether the relationship with the Greens was all that it should have been. I mean, whether or not it was actually true, there's a perception that the Greens were, two junior ministers who seemed to have an awful lot of say in what was going on. And I think my first warning sign was the deposit return scheme. I mean, I thought Lorna Slater handled that so very, very badly. I thought it was a really bad piece of work that was done there. I think perhaps Humza should have rethought, maybe not the whole Butte House agreement, but rethought the role of the Greens at that point. So perhaps he was elected in continuity, but was just too continuous, if you like. I mean, I think John Swinney, of course he would be seen as a continuity choice if he went forward for it, but what John Swinney does have is years and years and years of experience. He's had the benefit of being in government at a very high level. But he's also had the benefit of being out of government. and watching things unfold. And that's a very, very good place to be because you're seeing it from both sides. He's been out in communities and learning what people want. So he might be another continuity candidate, but continuity and stability, I believe, are the best way forward that we can have with someone with the political acumen, knowledge, and care that the likes of John Swinney would have.
I'm very sorry to interrupt you, Linda. I'm getting a little bit of buzzing on the line, and I don't know if it's just me or if that's on
Yeah.
the report itself.
No, I'm sorry, I heard that too.
Oh, okay. Oh, it seems to be good now.
No, that's fine. I was done.
Oh, okay.
Over to
Would you
Sandra.
just in case the buzzing overshadowed something that you said at the end, would you like
Right.
to just repeat the final a little bit? Did you say you were hearing it as well, Sandra?
I think I was really just saying support John Swinney
Can I come in a
because
wee
I think
bit then?
Yeah, Sandra, you feel free to take over. It seems like everything is fine.
Thank you, Patrick. We always agree, and well, don't always agree, but Linda and I mostly agree in most things. Anyway, come from the same hymn sheet or sing from the hymn sheet. But I think the biggest problem was I didn't see Hamza as a continuity candidate. I think a lot of folk thought he would be a continuity candidate, and I think this is where the problems lay, because whilst perhaps did, the Green Party seemed to have a free hand in anything that they put forward. Lorna Slater, nobody seemed to interfere and say, well, wait a minute here, you haven't really spoken to, the clubs, the pubs, and all that kind of stuff about this, that, and the other. She seemed to have had a free hand, and I think Hamza had a bit of a problem reining them in, type thing, in the various aspects of what they were doing, which they'd been allowed to do previous to Hamza becoming First Minister. So I think he had a bit of a problem continuing on. That's where the continuity part came from. So I think there was a number of underlying, ripples, even then. And then with the threats saying, etc., etc., then he ended up, the one that pulled the plug, basically on it. John Swinney, continuity candidate. I think it's a, clean sheet, basically. Linda's absolutely right. I mean, he's solid. He will give people confidence as well. So whoever wins, I don't know who will go forward and who will win. But whoever wins, the one thing I have to say is we all have to, all in the SNP and whoever, has to go behind them. Because at the end game here is to destroy the Scottish Parliament from the Unionists, and the Greens have fell into that trap.
Thank you, Sandra. Now we're coming up on a UK general election within the year. How did both or either of you think Hamza Yusuf resignations affect the general election coming up? Starting with Linda.
I think it's a few points. I mean, first of all, what I would say is, see if you believe in independence. You believe in independence. And the SNP is the best vehicle for independence that Scotland has. So I'm not convinced that it will hugely affect where we were in the general election. I mean, I know there's issues about getting rid of the Tories and everything else, and Labour are making a big play about only they can do it, blah, blah, blah. But I don't think the resignation of Hamza Yousaf will affect any of that hugely. I think what's more interesting, to be honest, is what will happen to the Greens, because I think there's a lot of discontent out there among those who believe in independence about Lorna Slater's comment about independence not being a red line for the Green Party. And I think there's a lot of those who believe in independence who will make the Greens pay for some of that. But of course, that'll be more apparent in a Scottish Parliament election than it would be in the general election coming up.
Thank you, Linda, and same to you, Sandra.
I don't think it will make any difference in Scotland. Linda has already explained that fact. It's a UK general election. I think Hamza, obviously standing down, his speech was excellent, as I said previously as well. I think he got a lot of support from a lot of people that you wouldn't expect to support him. So I think it's absolutely backfired for them, basically, in the UK, because obviously Labour are pushing that. But the biggest problem we have in Scotland, i.e. in a general election, is the media. Because everything that the Tories have put forward, Labour have said they're going to do as well. I mean, you've got the situation now. We were having raids today in Glasgow and Easterhouse in regards to asylum seekers being taken away. Thankfully, it didn't happen. People turned up in Easterhouse, but it didn't happen. Labour have said they wouldn't send these people back. That's one thing. Scottish Parliament, Hamza, basically in the Gaza-Palestinian situation, have always been there at the forefront, sticking up for what's right and what's just. Westminster Labour, well, Tories, we know what they're like. No, it hasn't happened there either. And then you've got the situation, Linda mentioned it earlier on, about people really, really struggling. And I think what's going to have to happen, I don't think it'll affect the voting here in Scotland, but to make it even better, we're going to have to take it head on, particularly standing charges, electricity, this new pipeline that's putting forward. I've already written and asked Gillian Martin that what's going to go on with this new pipeline, taking our electricity down south, etc., etc. We're going to have to up our ante here, get a bit smarter, and explain to the people out there, this is what's happening, and either one, we're going to stop it, or two, why we can't stop it. The situation that's going on, pensions, the WASPy women. I mean, I was on the WASPy cross-party group. We've been fighting for years, and so is Marion Fellows, in regards to that. We need to push these issues to the electorate and let them know if they vote in Labour in the general election, then they're not any better than Tories. And there's one thing I did disagree with Hamza on the election, process. We don't care if it's Tory, Lib Dem or Labour. We want independence. It doesn't matter if it's Tory free or whoever's free. And I think that's a wrong tactic to take. And Linda had kind of got a point there, hit it in the head. Who's advising, or who was advising Hamza? Whoever gets to be First Minister, I think, has got to have a really good look at the advisors I've got and ask some questions. Because the route about that going down, make this a Tory free zone. No, let's make it a unionist free zone and become independent. I think Linda hit it in the head in that respect.
Thank you. And if when Scottish election does end up rolling around, do you think that the this last week will impact how list votes are put down on ballot papers? Starting with
I
Linda.
think that's where the Greens will get a wee bit hammered, because there's a lot of SNP supporters, even that I know, and I'm sure Sandra knows, who gave the Greens their second vote, with the belief that, having a good representation of independistas in the Scottish Parliament, regardless of party, was very, very important. So I think the absolute civil war that the Green Party are having within at the moment, and some of that's about this red line independence issue that Lorna Slater actually put into words. So I think that's a huge issue for the Green Party. And I think there's also a huge issue about, Green Party representatives siding with the Unionists to bring down
Huge.
an independence believing First Minister of Scotland. So I think, yes, the list vote will be affected, and I think it will be far easier for SNP and independent supporters to be doing SNP 1 and 2 on their voting.
Thank you. Sandra, was there anything you'd like to add to that?
I agree completely with Linda. And one of the things that I will emphasise, and I think I already mentioned it as well, is the fact that you've got the unionist parties joining together, the three of them, Labour, Lib Dem, Tories, all join. They've done it before and they'll do it again. And then you have a party who joined a government ministerial, cars, seats, whatever you want to call it, and salaries, and yet they come out and say, well, actually, independence isn't really, we're not really that bothered about that. We want whatever else it is we want, basically. And they've actually completely shot themselves in the foot. And people have seen what they are now. I mean, I was at a rally last Saturday, the Gaza one, where Ross Greer was speaking. And he was speaking, and he was explaining to the crowds that were there in regards to the climate change and why the Scottish Government had to drop from 75 to 72%. And his explanation was very, very good. And then I spoke to Patrick Harvey, and he just looked at me. And I really caught me by surprise when he was vitriolic against Humza Yousaf. And what's came across is just how petty the Greens are seen to be. It's not for the good of the country. It's for the good of the Scottish Parliament. It was basically that man took our ball, Humza, and we're not going to play with him anymore. It's ridiculous. That's not grown-up politics. So they really, I think, will suffer, absolutely suffer. They won't get any second votes from SNP. I've never given them anyway, but they will never get a second vote from SNP in an election.
Thank you. That wraps us up on the Humza Yousaf story. You were both great. For our next story, the UK government is accused of politicising the Horizon scandal. The SNP has accused the UK government of cynically politicising the Horizon scandal by insisting on excluding Scotland from the Post Office Horizon System Offences Bill, ahead of consideration of the bill in the House of Commons today, Monday. The SNP has tabled an instruction extending the bill to Scotland, as with those tabled by the Northern Ireland parties and the UK government extending to Northern Ireland. SNP amendments 57 to 69 and new clauses 4 and 5 extended the bill, including by adding the list of relevant Scottish offences and providing consequential measures. Leader campaigner SNP MP Marian Fellows has written to the Minister of State for Enterprise, Markets and Small Business, Kevin Hollinrake, urging him to rethink abandoning a four-nations approach, without which exoneration and financial redress for sub-postmasters in Scotland could be significantly delayed. The UK government previously said the bill would only cover England and Wales, excluding Scotland and Northern Ireland, but have since U-turned and added Northern Ireland to the bill. The SNP amendments, which, if voted on and passed, could extend the bill to Scotland. Commenting, Marian Fellows MP said, "By refusing to adopt a four-nations approach, the UK government is cynically politicising an issue on which we should all be united in our efforts to secure exoneration and full financial redress for victims of the scandal." Their U-turn on the inclusion of Northern Ireland to the bill shows they can include Scotland, but are simply choosing not to. They should back our amendments that would change this. Labour, Tory, and Lib Dem parties, whose ministers oversaw the Post Office as it delivered the scandal, must not block SNP measures to ensure justice for those affected in Scotland. The Horizon scandal is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our time, and responsibility to fix this injustice falls squarely at the doors of Westminster.
Absolutely.
Passing over to our guests, what are some of the potential complications in including Scotland in this bill? What is the reason as to why Scotland could be excluded? Either one of you.
If you don't mind,
Andrew, please.
Carry on, Sandra.
Is that okay? Okay,
Yeah,
like that.
right.
I'll come in into this particular one, Patrick. It's a continuation of basically pushing everything towards Scotland, even though we're not responsible for it, and basically making out that Scotland is not ready to take responsibility. Now, the Post Office is a UK company, it's not a Scottish company, and the reason that Westminster is saying that we have to have responsibility for it is because justice is devolved to the Scottish Parliament. But the whole reason, the entree from Westminster, is that any monies that would be paid out to these unfortunate people, and the absolute disgrace that it's been going on so long, would have to come out of the Scottish Parliament budget. And that is the whole reason for it. Okay, we have our own justice system, but when you look at Northern Ireland, they've actually got greater powers. They have what they call special powers. Northern Ireland's got greater powers than Scotland's got. But because it's under the GB, according to Westminster, they want to bring it in there. So the whole fault lies in the awarding of the contract, which was awarded by Westminster, and therefore the responsibility lies with them. But they want to push that on to Scotland and make out that we are incapable of looking after any affairs whatsoever, and it's just to make the Scottish Government look bad, basically.
Thank you, Sandra. Linda, is there
Yeah.
something more you'd want to add?
I mean, Sandra's covered it, but the only thing I would add is that the UK government manages to include Scotland in lots of things when it suits them. They're quite capable of putting legislation in place that overrides Scottish legislation, so they do it when it suits them. So it's a cynical move, it is a political move. Marion Fellows is absolutely right. It's trying to make the Scottish government look bad. It's about the dumbing down of devolution, ergo the Scottish Parliament.
Is there a potential complication in the fact that these cases regarding Horizon in Scotland were handled by the Procurator Fiscal, while in most of the UK, including England and Wales, it was just handled by the Post Office themselves? It was like an in-house sort of examination. Do you think this is a strong enough excuse?
They use that excuse, but as I say, it's these kind of things have never stopped them before when it absolutely suits them to do it. I mean, they've just been a Four Nations approach on, for example, the smoking thing that, that they've done, which is a whole different subject that we won't get into because I've got opinions on that as well. There was a
Hopefully
Four
a future
Nations approach
episode.
in that, so they obviously talk to each other. You know, all of a sudden, when it comes to people's lives that have been so badly affected, they cannot talk. It's ludicrous.
Right.
They did the same with the infected blood scandal. Did the same
Of
with
course
that.
they did.
Did the same with the infected blood scandal, which was not Scotland's fault, basically. But we ended up, and quite rightly so, because they weren't moving in Westminster, Scotland ended up paying and bringing that forward, basically, for the folk that were affected by that. But this is, I think the word was cynical, Linda used, and that's exactly what this is. It's absolutely cynical. They've known for 18 years. People have died and committed suicide, been in jail. And in England as well, by the way. And then all of a sudden, it's hands off, just in Scotland, but not hands off in the rest of the so-called United Kingdom. It's all a cynical ploy to do down the Scottish Parliament.
Thank you, Sandra. For our next story, the UK government minister says people with depression or anxiety could lose benefits. The Work and Pensions Secretary, Mel Stride, has said that people with depression or anxiety could lose access to sickness benefits as part of major welfare changes that have been described as an assault on disabled people. This morning, Mel Stride announced the plans to overhaul the ways disability benefits work and was addressing the House of Commons on the issue today. In a Green Paper due to be published alongside Stride's Commons statement, ministers will set out plans to change personal independence payments, PIP, the main disability benefit for adults, through changes to eligibility criteria and assessments. While he sought to portray the proposals as part of a grown-up conversation about the best form of welfare provisions, he also indicated the focus on the plan was part of a conservative election strategy designed to put some pressure on Labour, on the Labour in a general election in which the Tories are expected to suffer a heavy defeat. The plans, which will be consulted on over the coming months, also include proposals to move away from a fixed cash benefit system, meaning people with some conditions will no longer receive regular payments, but instead access to treatment if their condition does not involve extra costs. James Taylor, the Executive Director of Strategy at disability equity charity Scope, called for an end to the reckless assault on disabled people and to fix the real underlying issues. The Scottish Adult Disability Payment is administered by Social Security Scotland and is not directly affected by the plans, but could result in cuts to the Scottish Bloc grant through reduced Barnett consequentials. Linda, asking you first, how would you expect conversations like this to be handled? We're being promised this is as grown-up discussions. What do you hear when you hear that statement?
I can't be grown up about this, Patrick, because I just think these are disgusting people that would even consider doing things like that. I think it's absolutely appalling. I think some of the things that have been said, I mean, Rishi Sunak was trying to make out as if folk with depression, anxiety and stuff just get believed and they don't have to go through any assessments or any tests. That's nonsense. I spent years as a constituency MSP fighting the case for people. So they just say anything that suits them. And it makes me feel quite sick, actually, because we have spent years and years trying to get mental health issues dealt with in the same way as physical health issues, and to have parity of esteem, to stop people feeling stigmatised, and they are just taking the rug out from under it. I fought for all my time in Parliament to have these benefits devolved so that we've already shown in Social Security Scotland with what we've taken over that we can do things in a better way. And what's really interesting me is everybody's assuming there's going to be a Labour UK government. I want to know what Labour think about this, because if Labour at UK level are going to go along with this, or a form of it, and at the moment I understand they're just saying, oh, it's a consultation, so we don't need to respond at the moment. Well, that's disgusting too. And I would hope, though I suspect it wouldn't happen, that so-called Scottish Labour would stand up and say, no, enough's enough. It's time to devolve more powers to Scotland. And in fact, it's time to be saying, let's seriously look at independence, because people are being treated so very badly.
Thank you. Sandra, what would you add to that?
I would concur with everything that Linda has said. I mean, the reason people, they don't wake up one day and think they're depressed or whatever, and they're just going to go on and get benefits. But the way this Tory government has annihilated anything and everything for people who are basically on the breadline, more people are suffering from mental health issues, losing their jobs, can't afford to feed their families, can't afford to heat their houses. That would cause anybody to have depression and mental health issues. They should be looking at why people have got depression and mental health issues, not to punish them. And what I find equally appalling is the fact that you've got people sitting there who haven't a clue. They're millionaires, billionaires. They don't even pay taxes. Rees Moggs and all these other ones don't even pay taxes in this country. And they've a cheek to tell people who are vulnerable that they can't access anything. They can't access treatment. They can't access any monies for it. And here they are sitting there, 2 and 3 jobs at times, making up legislation and don't pay a penny into the country. If they did, perhaps we would have the money to help these people. It's sickening and absolutely disgusting. And I would hope, I don't hold out hope, as Linda said, but Labour are just going to continue the same, because they've took this middle road. They've took the same, quotes as what Farage had and what Tories have got, and that's all they are now, Labour. They're nothing like the old Labour that people knew. The folk have got to know about this. I would put an appeal out to the media. For God's sake, do your job and tell people what's happening here.
Thank you to you both. For our last story, Ireland reaps a €700 million Brexit bonanza from customs duties.
Yeah.
Ireland has landed a €700 million Brexit bonanza with a steep increase in tax revenues flowing from customs duties now applicable to import of clothing, food, and other goods from Great Britain. Before Brexit, the UK enjoyed customs-free exports to Ireland and the rest of the EU because it was part of a single market and customs union. After Boris Johnson's hard Brexit and the UK leaving the single market, it meant fresh controls, checks, and duties would be payable on exports to the EU. New data in Ireland shows a 90% jump in customs duty receipts in Ireland between 2020 and 21, when Brexit came into force. Taking the pandemic into account and comparing 2019 with the three post-Brexit years, a significant jump in revenues can be seen. In 2021, there was a €178 million increase, or 52% increase in customs revenues compared with 2019. In the following year, receipts were 80% higher by the same comparison, accounting to an extra €617 million. And in 23, the Irish Exchequer scooped a 72% increase. The Brexit bonanza is likely to be reflected across the EU, but is particularly felt in Ireland because Great Britain is one of the biggest trading partners, with exports worth around £57.6 billion to the country in 2023, according to data released by HMRC on the 19th of April, making Ireland the UK's sixth largest trading partner. Sandra, asking you, what do we get out of this?
And I was just going to say, I don't know whether to laugh or cry, basically. Laugh at the fact because, Brexit, and it's been such a golden goose, as you might say, for Ireland, and cry because we voted to stay in the EU and it could have been a golden goose for us. That's all I can say on the matter, because it's self-explanatory, isn't it? If we were independent, excuse me, we would be like Ireland. So that's all I can say on that one.
Thank you, Sandra.
Yeah.
Linda, final comment from you?
Well, yeah, you always look at these things when you see all these figures coming up, and the first question you say is who benefits? Well, who benefits here is Ireland, as a very successful, smaller than Scotland, with fewer resources, independent nation, and a full member of the European Union. Ireland benefits. The flip side of that is who pays. And it's the consumer at the end of the day. So as Sandra says, you don't know whether to laugh or cry. You laugh because it's so blooming predictable. Cry because it could have been so very different.
Thank you to you both. And that will be it for this evening. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford the £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make regular monthly payments, thank you very much. Our focus must now move to securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base and regular funding. Thanks again to Linda Fabiani and Sandra White, former SNP MSPs, for joining me today and granting their insight. Goodbye. Thank you for watching.
Bye. Thank you.